Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Welcome to the next in our series of webinars brought to you by the IOSH Financial Services Group. My name's Hugh Jones. I'm the current chair of the group. I'm hoping that you'll find the next 35, 40 minutes one that will help us become re-engaged in these strange times where we see very few people other than via a screen. Keith Lewis is the social media manager for Zurich Insurance in the UK. I know from experience, Keith is very passionate about this subject and really wants people to make the best use of social media that they can. So please enjoy the session. Keith will be more than happy to take questions at the end. I'm now going to stop talking because I need to learn a lot about my social media presence as well. So I'm going to hand you over to Keith, and a massive thank you from the Financial Services Group for doing this for us.
My pleasure. Thanks, Hugh. Thank you very much for that, and good afternoon, everybody, to all those who have spending some time with us today. You may have been confused by the headline of all this, and I will go through the brighter brick analogy. It's an analogy that I've kind of used over the last couple of months, and it's kind of stick with me, and hopefully it'll help you to just hook onto a little idea that I've got for you as we go through it. What I'm going to go through over the next half an hour or so, and then there's loads of times for Q&A, is to kind of give you a scene setter for where we are in the social media world. It's obviously a massive shifting world and changing all the time. Even the last week or so, for those of you who are in different platforms, things change all the time. So I'll give you a sort of scene set as to where we are. Then I want to talk about how social media can help you and help you as a group, us as a group. To just get more engaged with people, as you just said. Look, we're struggling to find a way to operate and engage in this new world that we're all living in 2020 and into 2021. I am going to go into LinkedIn because I think it helps. It's the most professional social media platform. So I've got some really tactical things for you to think about and look at when it comes to LinkedIn specifically, but you can take lots of the principles that I'll talk about into other platforms if that's where you choose to do. So hopefully that's why you think you're here. That's what I'm going to cover. I say there's plenty of time for Q&A, and I'm more than happy to sort of riff off anything that I say as we come back to it later on. So a question I ask everybody, and there's not an easy way to do it on this particular webinar stream, but it's a question I always like to ask, because hopefully as I'm going through this, I can give you some help and some advice as to get over some of the barriers that might be facing you. So what is stopping you from being more social? And the fact that there's so many of you here today shows that there is an issue, there is a question somewhere in there. So lots of the answers that I get within my world, obviously I work for Zurich, and I'll explain a little bit more about me in a minute. We're in a financial services world. Many of you will be as well. So we are bound into regulation and compliance. And that's the thing that often puts people off. But as I'll show you a bit later on, and we'll go into some real tactical stuff about where content comes from, the types of things we can be talking about, that shouldn't be a barrier for you. Time is the other answer that many of you will have just have spouted out as I haven't got time for all this. Well, that's fine. Part of the thing we've got to get thinking about is, why are we on there? And again, as we go through, I'll kind of feed that what's your why thing as we go through to help do that. And the other thing might be permission. There may be within your organization, whoever it is you work for, they may have different rules and regulations as to why they don't want you to do it. I'm hoping that by demonstrating what we do and giving you the message that I give to my colleagues within the firm, if a company like us can do it, and we're one of the biggest insurers in the world with all the regulation and compliance and bureaucracy that goes with an organization like ours, if we can, then I think you can as well. So hopefully we can get you over some of the barriers that you've got. If you've got another what's stopping you, by all means chip in at the end and we can have a conversation about that. So what's this number mean to you? It might be familiar, it might not be familiar. That's the number of people who claim to have health and safety, occupational health and safety within their profile on LinkedIn. So that's an enormous number of people out there operating in your space. And this is where my analogy starts to come with a brick. When you're looking at this picture, we all sit in as one brick in the giant wall, whether it's an 80,000 size brick of health and safety professionals on LinkedIn, whether it's 4,500 people within Zurich in the UK, whether it's 55,000, whatever that number is you're looking at, we are all a brick in our corporate walls or our sectoral walls. But looking at a picture like this, hopefully you've all one of those bricks is dragging your attention. What is it that's dragging you to a darker one or a lighter one, or the lines in between? And that's what I keep coming back to. So helping you to become the brightest brick in your world as we elevate what we do. Because on all the platforms, many people are on them, but not many people are creating content. I think it's a stat on LinkedIn that only 1% of the 700 million people on there are actually posting content. So you're already, by starting to get more active, and will start to become the brighter brick in your particular world. So that's my analogy. That's my that will flow through lots of things that we talk about today. You'll see on the slides as well. So a little bit about me, and the reason I show you this is just to get you a feel for where I'm coming from, the different parts of me. But you've all got a slide like this about you, and what you have on your slide can be brought into social, which when it comes to some of the barriers that you've got, that might actually help you to talk about the things that all the elements of you that make up the version of you that you are, how you bring in your whole self, and you can decide what from your slide you bring onto social. So from my perspective, my background is media and PR. I've spent most of my career in sort of press office roles, communications roles, whether it's internal or external, and now into social media. But outside of that, I've got everything else. My other passion is rugby. I'm a rugby referee. We can talk about that at the end if you want. As well, I'm a television match official now in the Premiership in England. I do some European stuff as well. So you'll often find me posting on my channels about that content. It's part of what I do. So it won't be uncommon to see me talking about rugby on LinkedIn or on Twitter. I've also got my social media platforms. So I've run a blog at keith.social. I've got a YouTube channel which has got some rubbish videos on it, but you can have a look if you want. But I also create content for other platforms for other things. So from a refereeing perspective, I run a website called rugbyreferee.net, and I create a podcast for referees. And those niche areas that we've got, sorry, I just noticed that things were flashing. I can't see the chat on the screen that I'm looking at, so apologies if you are chipping in as we go through. But then I've also got, outside that content, I've got my family as well. And we've all got different rules about what we bring into social. You see the kids' faces there. We tend not to do that as a family on our external. But part of what I do, because they are around, and what I do with them does come onto social as well. So have a think about your version of that slide and all the different things that you can have and how you bring those to your social media platforms, because it's perfectly okay to bring as much or as little as you want into even the professional space. So what's going on out there in the big social world? Look, there's more devices out there, mobile phone connections, than there are people. That's probably not a surprise as you're looking around your desk right now. I've got 2 phones and an iPad here, as well as my laptops. That's not uncommon around your own desks and your world. But the number of active social media users in the UK are growing all the time. So it's not a surprise there to many of us. It's become but social media is no longer a new thing that people don't do. And I think most people, unless they've deliberately opted out, are on at least one platform, whether it's Facebook from a more personal family perspective, or they have a Twitter account or a LinkedIn account. Many people do. That's good. That's great. But what channels are people using? Now, the one that interesting, the top one here is the one that gets most questions, actually, YouTube. Not a social media platform that people would add to a list. If I was to ask you about social media platforms, you probably wouldn't say YouTube. But if you subscribe to any YouTube channels, the community that they have in the comments and the community around those channels is absolutely a social media place. But then you've got the other ones there. This is just UK, so what's happening in the UK for last year. This might have changed through the course of this year. Obviously, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn are the big ones there. Interestingly, TikTok down on the bottom there, the penultimate one, 8%. That's at the start of the year. I think that's probably shifted massively this year. We'll be interested to see what next year's chart looks like. And as this chart has developed over time, we've seen platforms come and go. Google Plus was in the top 4 a couple of years ago. That doesn't exist anymore. Google have absorbed it into other things. Interesting thing just to consider there are the bluer ones, or the non-yellow ones if anyone's colorblind. They are private messaging groups, which are still a social place. Obviously, you might be more familiar with people using WhatsApp for perhaps work groups and conversations and team groups and things like that. You may have work groups versions of that, whether it's Teams or Skype for Business, whatever it is that looks like in your organization. But you can have up to 250 people in a WhatsApp group, and there are little communities of expertise out there that can be really beneficial to us as experts in trying to share knowledge, and within a safe and compliant way. We always have to remember to be very careful about what we're posting in those groups and whether we're allowed to, so just be careful. but there are communities of expertise and conversation. So get involved in them. I've got one on my phone that's about voice technology. Someone who I know set up, does lots of work in the voice tech area, set up this group, and there's just following lots of information goes through there, links to articles, conversation about stuff about that. So maybe it's something that you want to consider as a group, whether you do already, but you might be reflective in that. It's a real problem for us as brands. If I put my Zurich social media manager hat on, they're a real pain in the backside for me because I can't get into them. I can see what's going on YouTube and Facebook to some extent, Twitter and LinkedIn. They're all generally have API access for social media platforms to go and hunt around and sniff around and see who's saying what. I can't do that on Facebook Messenger, and rightly so, or on WhatsApp groups. As a brand, I don't know what's being said about Zurich in those groups. So it's a challenge from a brand perspective, but that's a sense of what's going on. And what people are doing there? Well, video is massive. Oh, no one's moved here recently. The lights have gone out. Video content is huge, and that reflective in perhaps the platforms that people are on. 85% of you are watch videos on YouTube. Of course, that's what YouTube's for. Watching vlogs, listening to audio content. I obviously talked about my podcast from a referee perspective, but the podcast increase over the last couple of years has grown up because the apps are on our devices. And when we're out getting our 1 hour daily exercise or whatever the next version of that looks like, we can just plug something in, whether it's niche around our function, whether it's a niche around our expertise or our habit or our hobbies, or if it's just news or entertainment, there is a podcast in a niche to suit you. So lots of different content streams out there that people are, that hopefully is reflected by what you're up to. Other things that I've spotted through the course of this year, I'm not going to labor on these too much. This is a session in its own right. Mobile and messaging clearly on devices and messaging platforms we just talked about. People power. There are organizations are trying to bring their communities and their audiences into the game and to get them to create content. That's an opportunity, but it's also a massive risk for us. When you invite the British public to get involved in stuff, they sometimes do, and they do exactly what the British public sometimes just do. And the good example that I talk about there is sort of the Boating Up Boatface incident a couple of years ago, when the National Oceanic Service wanted to name their new vessel. They let the British public just decide something, and then social media did its thing, and Boating Up Boatface was the top most voted name for that vessel. I think they found a way around it by giving the little submarine on the back of it that name, and it became the I think the RSS Sir David Attenborough as it was formally given in due course. So you've got to be careful about inviting the public to get involved, because you can't really control that once you ask them to do that. Voice, we're talking about that. I don't mention particular types of devices for fear of waking them up around your houses, but we've got little boxes on the shelf that respond when we speak to them. And perhaps we need to think about that in terms of what we do as a company, as a sector, to try and influence the messages that's coming out there. If we're all using our voices to ask questions, how do we influence what comes back? So I think that's a real opportunity for us to look into, which is why I've got that WhatsApp group as I'm starting to think about it. We've got the pay to play. Now, this is more of if you're thinking about social from a company perspective, we as a company have to give the platforms money. They're free for us as individuals to use, so therefore they've got to make their money from somewhere. So that comes from advertisers and things like that. And sometimes you have to give them a little bit of money for them to share our organic content to a wider audience. It's just part and parcel of it. I don't like it, but it's just the fact of life. Video we've talked about. Influencers is really important, and I'm going to come back to that in a minute, because we need to shift the idea about what you think is an influencer to what I think an influencer is. And then we just talked about podcasting. I think it's a real opportunity for us. So many of us have a face for radio, which is why I like doing podcasts. Hugh, I can exactly see on a podcast, but there's certainly, we've got expertise, and it's much easier for people to talk about it than if I stick a camera in people's faces. You instantly get into, oh, I'm on TV, scary mode. So audio is certainly something to be thinking about. Does your social media footprint look like this? So this is Zurich's social media footprint. We're everywhere, because as you might expect from a company like ours. But if your personal social media footprint looks like this, it's way too much. You haven't got time. If time was one of your what's stopping you issues, then doing all this it'll just send you into a spiral of content and just bad place. Pick a channel or one or two channels and do them well. And why do you do that? Or which one do you do? Well, that will depend on why you're there. If you're there to share your expertise and become a brighter brick in your health and safety world, then perhaps LinkedIn is the place to do it. If you're into rugby and you're into that sort of thing, well, Twitter and YouTube are great places to go. If you're in a financial services world and you're trying to sell a product to an end customer, where is that customer? It might be that they're on Instagram. If you've got a particular niche areas, you need to look about that. Think about what your why is, and that will help you go down a particular channel choice. But please, if your social media footprint personally looks like this, you're doing too much and you won't be doing any of it particularly well. So pick one or two that works. So I said I'd come back to influence. I absolutely will. So this is where we start to talk about influence. One of the barriers that you often think is that who cares what I say? That's because you think you haven't got influence. When we talk about social media influencers, these are the types of people that jump to mind, whether it's Harvey without the vowels, who's in this is Strictly, he's got something like 2.4 million YouTube followers. I think he had a pop career before that. Joe Wicks started his whole career on the public careers front by sharing his stuff on Instagram, and those 6 young folk on the couch there all went into the TikTok house back at the start of the year. 14 million followers across the 6 of them. That was when they went in. I dread to think what they are now. And that's what people think about influence. You've got to have these massive numbers behind you, but you totally don't. And we've got to start thinking about us as influencers, because you are. And why is that important? Easy for me to say, but this is the evidence. This is a graph from the Edelman Trust Barometer, which people in my world talk about all the time. It's a survey that's done regularly. It's been done for the last 20 odd years that looks at who is most trusted when it comes to delivering messages. And you sitting watching this are all on the left-hand side of this chart. Some of you may be in the privileged position of being a CEO or on a board or whatever it might be. But the trust as a person like yourself, as people who go to ask a question, as a regular employee of your organization, or as the expert that you totally are, as a company technical expert, even an academic one, you are all far more credible to deliver messages than people on the other side of the chart, the CEOs, the boards, journalists, no kidding, government, even more, no kidding. So that's why it's really important that we start to think of ourselves as influencers. No matter how big that influence might be, you can have a really great influence with a relatively small group of people. It doesn't have to be in the thousands or the millions. So we need to start thinking of ourselves in that space. So that's my why. As I said, the choice about it is for you. Now I'm gonna look into LinkedIn a bit now, because it feels like the obvious place to talk about for us as professionals. It is the professional network, and it is the place. Sorry, I always precurse this. People, obviously, LinkedIn started as the CV repository hub to get you on your next job. There is still an element of LinkedIn that is about that, but it's far bigger than that. Their whole aim is to connect people, to make them more productive and successful. Not about getting a new job. It might be a subplot to that, but in connecting up with people, whether it's people within our sector, whether in our industry, and making them more productive and successful, that is what LinkedIn is about. So why don't we do a little bit more of it? Slightly old numbers there, we're at 7, more or less doubled those numbers over the last couple of years. And since Microsoft bought it, they've really been on a journey to kind of extrapolate that into a place to look at job. Insight, knowledge, learning, training, connection, all the sorts of things. You can now spend much more time on LinkedIn, even if you're not looking at a new role. So how do we do it? So let's get tactical here. So I'm going to talk about LinkedIn, obviously building a good profile. There's some tips for you in here, but the principles can transmit across into Twitter, into Facebook, and I'll show you some examples of how that correlates later on. The key things on a profile are, from a LinkedIn perspective, but others as well, you've got to have a good photo. Why? Because people do business with people they know, and knowing what somebody looks like is part of that. It's just a fundamental part of it. And this is a 10-month-old memory here, but remember when we used to go out and meet people, and we used to meet people in public places to have a coffee or to just meet them for the first time, have a meal. Socializing, I believe they used to call it. Obviously, we can't do that now. But when we do get back into that space, it becomes important that you know the person you're going to meet for the first time. And this is a really great place to get your face out there so that people start to know who you are. They might infer stuff from it, the pictures that you put can help build your story. So at least have a good quality image there, and you've got the tools on your desk now. It's probably in your hand if you're doing something else on it. Take a good photo and get it uploaded. This is one I actually taken on a stage, but my previous one that you can see there on the further down, I took that on a stand using my phone. That was a selfie, good selfie, mind. But I took that photo myself. So you don't need to get a professional headshot snapper in to do it. You can do it yourself, and as long as it's real and it's authentic, and is it professional? Is it you at the end of a late night at an awards ceremony? Is it a wedding or a beach holiday, whatever it might be? There might be a good reason why you're doing that, thinking about your wider story. But in the whole, we want to be good headshot in a professional setting. The next thing under there from a LinkedIn perspective is your headline. These are the words underneath your name. If you've never changed it, it will have defaulted to your current job title and your current employer. But you can change that, particularly if your job title isn't quite tell the full story. So social media manager can mean anything, many different things to different people. I do a lot of this is employee advocacy, getting our employees to do stuff, and I do lots of coaching and encouraging people to do more. But if I was a social media manager who focused on doing ads on social media, then that's what I would put, and it might mean different things. So use that headline to tell a better story about who you are and what you're about, and you can change it. Just go in there and tweak it. You can change it as the years go on. You might focus on one thing in 1 month, move on to something else, but help it to tell the story. And it's crucial. That bit is really crucial, because those are the words that literally follow you around the platform. If you hover over me, when you find me on a comment over there, or you see a piece of content, those are the bits that sit underneath your name when people are first looking at you. So really make sure they're helpful 6 or 7 words that tell the story. Then we get into profile summary, which are now called about you, which is exactly what it says on the tin. You've got about 3 or 4 paragraphs, which you can use in that content to tell a longer story. Perhaps it's something you've lifted from your CV or your covering letter. If you've got that, why I'm a great person, couple of sentences that people often have on a file somewhere, you can use that. But again, look at how it's displayed. The first 3 sentences of those 3 paragraphs are the ones that you see first before you then have to click what's more, see more. So really make sure those first 2 sentences are the best 2 sentences of those 3 paragraphs, so that people want to either get the story in 3 sentences as well as your 6 words, and it starts to build out, and then they can click more if they want the potted history of who you worked for and what you learned at job X, Y, and Z. The bit underneath that is relatively new to LinkedIn, and this is called featured content, exactly what it says on the tin again. But it's where you can tag and you can pin different bits of content onto your profile. So really think about what you've got, and this is where we bring your about me slide that I talked about at the start. So it's not a surprise for mine to see a link to my referee site. I've got connections on my LinkedIn profile who are connected to me through rugby, so I give them that sort of content. There might be that's a podcast episode that was on for somebody else's podcast, so I've pinned that there. There might be just, you can see it sneaking off to the right there. There's a blog that I wrote about some changes that LinkedIn brought about recently. So you can put whatever sort of content you've got there, whether it's a piece of content on LinkedIn, whether it's something you've done elsewhere. If you're in the business of selling yourself and your services, then you can, if you've got a PDF or a video that sells your wares, then you can attach that to there, and it's adding instant value to your story. And then the stuff at the bottom is your latest content, the number of followers you've got, so you don't need to particularly worry about that. But getting those basics right on your profile automatically makes you a brighter brick than other people are on there. Use all those spaces. You've got this big banner image at the top if you want to add to your story. If you've got something, if you're out there inspecting something or observing something, perhaps get somebody to try and take a picture of you doing that. It just adds to your story visually. So some really easy tips there for you. Another LinkedIn tip here, and apologies to Hugh because I've used it as an example in a minute, but if you've looked at your LinkedIn profile, you've got a URL that comes with it. So linkedin.com/in/ whatever it is LinkedIn gave you if you've never changed it. So if you can see mine there, mine's Keith Lewis Comms. That's my handle across all the platform sites. If you ever want to find me on social media, at Keith Lewis Comms is where you will find me. But sometimes if you've been on recently, of course, 700 million users, they've just chucked a load of random names, particularly if you have a more common name. So you can change it. So it'll chuck some numbers on there. But what I want you to do is to look at your profile. If you've got those random numbers or digits, that they've appended to your name, go in and change it. Click on your profile where it says edit public profile and URL. It gives you the option there. You can see the pencil and you can go in and change that. It'll just highlight, it'll open up the end bit after the second slash, and you can put whatever you like. So always try and bring it right back to your name, as close to just your name as you can. If you have a brand like Keith Lewis Comms of your personal brand, then use that. But whatever it is, and this you can see the two alongside each other. So if you've never changed it, it'll probably be something like Hugh's, which I looked at a couple of days ago. So you might have changed it, probably not Hugh, something for you to do later on. But you can instantly see, and then you can use that more professional URL, and you can put it in your email signature. You can put it in a document elsewhere, wherever it is it might be. So it's just a little hack you can get in and have a little play around. Where do we go next? So I said that was all on LinkedIn. These are some Twitter examples, both mine and Zurich's. You can see the principles are the same. We've got a good image at the top, profile image, the same for me, be consistent. We've got another picture on the banner that adds to your story. And then you've got this bio piece, which gives you a snapshot of what's going to be included in that profile. So if you go to Keith Lewis Comms on Twitter, you're going to find social stuff, you're going to find rugby stuff, you're going to find Zurich stuff, all the things. And then there's a bit of family reference as well. So, and links out. So just make sure your profiles are built, principles are the same no matter which platform you've chosen. I said, mention consistency there. Whenever you hit a Zurich social media channel, you should know straight away by looking at it that you've hit a Zurich social channel. It's got the blue, it's got the logo. That's what we're all about. So in fact, we're going on a bit of a brand refresh at the moment, so it might be slightly different at the moment, but the point about consistency is the same. So a couple of tips on growing your audience before we get into content. LinkedIn's really helpful for this because it gives you some ideas. You can make it, sorry, gives you some ideas, but also lets you connect in a more personal way. And please, I do encourage people to do this. Don't just go through LinkedIn, clicking connect, and just let the thing. Because if you're all out there are watching this and you're wanting to connect with me, it would be nice to know why. Particularly if you're getting connection requests from perhaps left field. Obviously, if I'm seeing people with health and safety today, I'm going to know it's come from this webinar. But if it's not an obvious reason why someone like you would want to connect with me, then use the add a note option it gives you to explain. This chap here, when he did, looking to share, engage with, surrounded by stakeholder engagement and wants to connect with me, that's fine. If it's from left field and they haven't done that, I might just press ignore rather than accept, as is my right. So everyone's got slightly different rules. So if you personalize it as to why they should accept it, whether you've met them or you're perhaps going to meet them, you want to connect up front, you've read something they've done, whatever it might be, give them a reason to hit the accept button. If you're looking for new people, you can let the algorithm help. So if you go to someone's profile, this is my colleague Jackie, on the right-hand side of that, you'll see other people that have also viewed Jackie, and that might just help you to help build your audience and find people to connect with if you're getting yourself going. Don't do it too much. We don't want LinkedIn to think you're a robot and it will block you and put you in LinkedIn jail for a while if you just literally spend a few minutes click, connecting with people. It doesn't like that. Again, going back to the personalization option. So we've talked about what's going on. We've talked about profiles. We've talked about platforms. For me, content. Now, the obvious answer here for anyone who knows Lego is everything is awesome. That's the wrong answer. Everything is a content opportunity when it comes to this potential area of our social media world. We don't know what to post. That's the thing that's stopping you. So lots of things are content. We've got to be really careful. There is a compliance, for those of you operating in compliance worlds, we've got to be careful about what we say about particular products in particular audiences. But don't let that small sliver of stuff stop you from doing other things. So let's have a look and see where we get content from. We're going to go back to LinkedIn here. So we can use it as a search engine. We've got the phrases at the top. It will default to people, but you can change that little drop down there where it says content there. There's about 3 other things that sit behind that. If you change it to content, it will literally just give you that. So this is examples that I found last week as I was preparing for this, about content there that includes the words health and safety. So somebody in our world, whether you're on Steam, I don't know, congratulations. But it might be a reason for you to engage in that post, even if you don't follow. And then there's a story there that includes health and safety from a lady in New Zealand who's become the first member of the force to have a specially designed hijab as part of the uniform. So that's a really good piece. It mentions it's perfectly within health and safety guidelines of uniform. So that might be something that you want to then post. And this gives you something to comment on or to share. Even though I'm not connected with these people, I can still comment on them. I can still share it. I can share it in my network. I can add a view to it if I so desire. So let the search engines help you find good content. You can follow hashtags as another route on LinkedIn and other ones. A hashtag is just an amalgamation of stuff under one hashtag. Don't overthink hashtags. It's just an easy way of getting all the stuff into one place. So again, health and safety is a hashtag there, relevant to us. You can follow that. You can see it's got nearly 32,500 followers there. And if you're thinking that your LinkedIn feed is rubbish and it's not got stuff that's relevant to you, this is how you start to train the algorithm to give you good stuff. So if you follow that hashtag, it will then, anytime it's used, it will then put it on your feed. So it's a good way to start to build out. I see some really big numbers there, really straightforward. Okay, just some wider ideas, just going out wide. We obviously have to be careful, just harking back to the world we're in. We've got to be a little bit careful about some of these when it comes to product and end buyers of that product, but most of those you don't get anywhere close to on that list. But that industry news, whether it's health and safety industry, whether it's financial services industry, whether it's a particular subsector industry that you think you're in, then that's fine. Company news, your employer will be putting stuff in the public domain, so just share theirs if it's easier. We do it at Zurich, we literally put it on a plate for them to share on, because if they say it, thinking back to the trust issue, it's far more credible than if I say it through my brand channels. And again, if I say it through a Zurich branded channel, the number of people that are going to see it will be far less than if our UK workforce shares it, because their numbers, their followers collectively are far bigger than mine, and they're much a better quality and more diverse group of people. Just imagine the type of person that follows Zurich Insurance UK on Twitter. Yeah, it's not going to be the most disparate and diverse group of people. So sharing it around, getting you to share it, is far better. There's a hashtag we use there, Life at Zurich. You can replace my organization with yours on there, that just our employees are sharing what it's like to work here using that hashtag. And that's fantastic, because it's Hugh's voice, not Zurich's voice, or my voice, not Zurich's voice. And it's far more credible and authentic than it is than if it comes from a brand channel. And then we've got the bottom there, fun and personal. Not all the channels have to be dull and boring. Bring your whole self into it. And if you are a funny person, then bring it in. I try not to be funny because I do a really bad job of it. But you can bring those things in. I bring my rugby into LinkedIn, and it's becoming a much less serious place than it used to be. And some people don't like it and some people do. If you're seeing people doing stuff that you think is not for LinkedIn, then don't engage with it, and it will stop giving it to you. It's really straightforward. Or you can just unfollow that person or unconnect with that person if you want to. Partner content is a really free hit, because if you're a partner of Zurich's, we've got all our different parts of the organization are putting content out there. There might be organizations that we work with, whether it's the legal profession putting content out there, whether it's you guys, IOSH, putting content out there. Share IOSH's stuff, because it's free and it's been through the pain process of being signed off, so you know it's good. So that's the easy stuff. So there's loads of ideas there, but let's bring it down to reality. You've all got diaries that look like this. Well, hopefully not as busy, but this is a real snapshot of my diary back in March, just as we were getting into before lockdown. And there's stuff every day that could create a content opportunity. So everything's a content opportunity. Well, here's my diary, and here you've got things in there that might reflect in a similar way, whether it's an event that we used to be allowed to go to now online, whether it's a personal thing. So when I bring the family into it, I used to take them to their acro lesson at the leisure centre. So I pick them up from school, feed them, take them to the leisure centre. They do their classes. I sit in the leisure centre in the cafe, getting on with my work. I'm drinking a half decent cup of coffee, and it's a win-win for everybody. The gaffer's at home getting some peace and quiet, so she doesn't have to deal with them after school. So it's a win-win all round. It's a good piece of copy, a good piece of content. There's some rugby stuff there. It was budget day on the Wednesday. There's always something in our worlds that was going on from a budget, whether it's something that did happen, didn't happen, something we need to know about, a review of something, who knows what it might be. There's always something there. And then it was Friday the 13th last week, as it was a couple of weeks ago here. But that could create a social post. Everyone will have a view on whether Friday the 13th is something to hide from because it's scary and bad, or it's a complete load of codswallop. If you ask a question like that on particular platforms, everybody can literally everybody can answer that question in one way, shape, or the other. It might be engaging content, but that's just a way of looking at your diary and thinking about it in a positive way of finding something to talk about. Free one for you today. You've perhaps been to a great webinar about social media. There must be something in the last half an hour that I've said that could create a post. I didn't know this, I didn't know that, I'm going to do something else. Or love the brick thing, whatever it is. I'm putting words into your mouth here, but if you take that over the course of a week, there's plenty of stuff you can be talking about which doesn't impinge on a regulatory red line. So that's me wrapping up. Hopefully I've been through a lot of content there, so I can do this workshop over 3 days, I suspect. So I've gone quite quick on lots of areas. I've seen the light flashing, so I don't know if there's any questions brewing. We've given you some ways of using the social media platforms to build engagement, to grow and maximize your impact, and figuring out how you help to achieve your why through the art of social. Hopefully I've helped you to get over some of those barriers that you either voiced outside or internally when I asked that question at the start. And I'm more than happy to take questions now. If you want to connect with me or message me in whatever way, I shouldn't be hard to find on any of the socials. Please do come find me. I think I'm just going to leave you with a quote from our global chairman, Michael Lees, said a couple of weeks ago on a webinar that I was on. If you want to be heard, you need to shout. No one's going to stand up for IOSH or the things that you're interested and passionate about. No one's going to do it for you. And I think there's a real opportunity for you to start talking and being more visible and starting to raise your profile. And then we get to play the brighter brick game as well. I think that's my sign off, Hugh.
Keith, thank you very much indeed. Really appreciate that. What I found interesting is I'm a very small brick in 80,400 other bricks. So we really do need to raise our profiles if we are going to get heard. So that's all good. I know you've already had an impact, Keith, on the URL piece within LinkedIn. There's been a couple of comments about people doing that already. So if nothing else, that's been good. I've got a couple of questions that are mine before anybody else dives in. This is part of our personal branding. What else do we need to consider in our personal branding to really make us shine?
Blimey. I think having a consistency about it. It's all very well dipping into a platform once every couple of months, but it just doesn't start to play nicely with the algorithms and the visibility of it. So there is an element of time that you have to put into this. There is no easy answer to how much time do you put into this. We have to think about what we're trying to achieve, and it might be that we're trying to achieve a new job. It might be that we're trying to raise our influence as the expert in our field, or trying to get a view out on a particular line of subject, and that just involves you having to say it regularly in different ways. So people worry about personal branding too much. I think people worry about it too much. I'm not a huge fan of the phrase, to be honest. I just don't think there's another one out there. I think if you're just visible and you've got one image, that's your personal brand. So having one image that is across the different platforms is your personal brand. It helps to tell your story. And I think not overthinking it. We can really overthink stuff, particularly when we think, oh, I don't want to say that. What if somebody says that? Or what if somebody challenges me on it? Well, that's fine. We want people to engage with it. On the whole, people will do it in a positive and proactive way without leading us down the argument side of stuff. We have to be a little bit careful about the type of stuff we're saying. If we're going to get into politics, if we're going to start posting or commenting about politics, religion, Brexit, Trump, all the things, there we know what we're getting ourselves in for. So you're going that eyes wide open. But if we stick to our areas of expertise where we have a view, then share your view.
And I'm assuming based on expertise and channels, which channel would you recommend people use for professional? Is it the LinkedIn or?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the obvious one because it is the professional network. But I guess we have to go back to what's our why, and what are we trying to achieve, and in order to achieve that, how do we do it? So I think from a Zurich perspective rather than a Keith perspective, so one of our things that across social at the moment is to try and attract a more diverse set of people for the future into both Zurich and the insurance industry. So those people aren't yet on LinkedIn because they're either pre-career or they're just setting off. They haven't quite got there. So their audience isn't quite there yet. So therefore, we're trying to use things like Instagram and Facebook to try and influence parents and things like the parental influence role to try and do that. So that's our end game, is leading our channel choice. And so we need to think about where that audience is and what we're trying to achieve. But on the whole, LinkedIn is the professional to professional space, particularly if we're trying to raise expertise. If we're not trying to sell a product to an end user, then that's LinkedIn is the by far the best place. And it's predominantly really positive. I can see a conversation there about how do you deal with negative comments.
Yeah.
It's a great question. On the whole, it generally doesn't happen. Look, as an insurance company, there are always things don't go quite right when it comes to from a claims perspective. So sometimes things don't happen in the way we intend to happen, or we've made absolutely the right decision, but the end customer doesn't like it. But on the whole, people don't go onto LinkedIn and be negative because everyone's seeing it. When I talk about your employer your name sitting behind, if you're being really aggressive or rude or chauvinistic, I see way too much of that nonsense on LinkedIn, your employer's name is sitting right under next to your name, and that focuses the mind when people are being negative. But on the wider concepts of dealing with negative stuff, you've got to look at it and think about that up front. So what are you going to do if somebody is being negative? If you're in a company like ours, we've got an escalation process. We get it offline as soon as we can, so we've got somewhere to send them to, whether it's just whether it's just an email address. We've got to get it in. Look, we're regulated, so a complaint has to be dealt with as a financial services complaint. We've got a process for it, so we know where we're sending people, and the complaint will be dealt with by the right team. As an individual, if people are being negative, you can either ignore it. You don't have to respond. You can encourage people to get involved on your behalf, so it becomes a debate and a controlled conversation, or you can challenge it right back. So a couple of options there. On some platforms, you can just delete it. I'm not one for deleting stuff because it might come back to bite you later on. But on some platforms, Facebook, you can hide the comment. So that I do that a lot from a Zurich perspective. People may say something that's not wrong. It's just rude. I just hide it. So you don't delete. If they come back to it, they will still see it, but nobody else will. So yeah, it's difficult. Joe's question there about unjustified. If the negative stuff is unjustified, depends on what side of the argument you're on. Often we might think as a company or as an individual that it's unjustified. They think it is, and therefore it's just going to be an argument to escalate. So either get it offline and deal with it, or delete it, or just ignore it. From a brand perspective, we never like to ignore stuff. We always like to respond because we have to.
Keith, you're turning into slightly an IT help desk with the next question. Mary has tried changing her name, and the URL has said that the name is already taken. Does she need to add some form of character to the end of her name to solve that issue?
Yeah, sorry, I should have said that before. That's the problem with, again, like yours, Hugh. There'll be more than one Hugh Jones out there. It will. Yeah, you're gonna have to do some playing with it to find a version of you and your name that's not been taken. So it might be you might want to put a hyphen in there. So Mary-Finn might be enough. It might be, if you go down my route, Keith Lewis Comms, it might be Mary Finn Health and Safety. You can do that. That's totally fine. It might add to your branding if you like. You can add that into your URL. Particularly though, if you're a sole operator, that's often a good way of doing it. If you've got your own organization, it could be Keith Lewis Zurich. If you wanted to do that, obviously it kind of need to think about if I was to go somewhere else, you need to change that in due course. So yeah, there'll be ways of you have to play with it. I would try and avoid numbers unless you've got no choice. If you can add a hyphen or an underscore, perhaps adding your middle name or initial. So at one point I was Keith Mark Lewis because that's my name, Keith M. Lewis, Keith Lewis Zurich, Keith Lewis Comms. There are lots of different variations you can try, so just keep trying it, I'm afraid, Mary.
Okay. And then one around IT security, really, from Mumtaz.
It's a great question.
Is it safe to accept invites from random people? And if
So
so, will you accept an invite off me later?
So this is where I go back to what I said about adding a note. If for me, think about it as the recipient. Are you a random? Why are you connecting with me? So I'm an insurance guy. I've been in the automotive industry. I work for Zurich. If none of your obvious things are in that ballpark or rugby, then you become a random. So therefore, you need to give me a reason for me to connect. Now, some people have different rules all the time, but individuals have different rules about who you connect with. Some people, quite rightly and justifiably, and I'm fine with this, only connect with people they know. That's totally all right. If you're looking to grow your voice, you might want to think about going a bit wider than that, is to have a rule in. So for me, I connect with anyone at Zurich, it's fine. Anyone involved in rugby, totally fine. Recruiters, yep, because why wouldn't you? Literally, why wouldn't you? They might just have a job that you don't know about, that they found you, they've gone to the bother of looking at it. As an individual, I'm going to connect with recruiters because they might have something up their sleeve for me. And why not? Obviously, it's different if you are an agent, if you're recruiting, so you get people trying to connect because they've got people they want to use their agency to help you fill the gaps. That's slightly different. But then my other rule is it in my interests to connect with them? Is there something about them that they're going to add some value to my network? Because I'm going to see their stuff. And if it's not, then it's not. And it can go away. So yes, you can accept invites from random people if you choose to. If you choose not to, that's totally fine. The other thing just to be aware of, because I wouldn't have mentioned it if you hadn't introduced it like that, Hugh, but it is becoming more common for phishing and fake profiles to try and connect with people to try and get into your network and trying to access your stuff. We do see it all the time at Zurich. There are some clues that crop up with people trying to connect with me. If the picture is just a bit too good to be true, and there is a bit of clickbait going on there, if it's a good-looking female, then they target men to try and say, yes, I'm going to connect because just life, genetics, they do it. But there might be some other things in the profile. So we've seen one with us in the last couple of weeks where within their profile they talk about Bitcoin. Well, that's just something Zurich's not ever going to be involved in. So certainly no one at Zurich will be involved in Bitcoin. It won't be in their profile. So that was a red flag. And then we put it through the system. And yeah, we look them up on the system, and they're not a real person. So we report it, and then it goes away. So yeah, just you have your little alarm bell going if it's somebody that's completely random, that doesn't make any sense, that you might want to just do a reverse image search on that profile. We found one, there was a chap last year who was passing themselves off. Their backstory just wasn't right. Said they worked for they were a project manager at NASA, and then they were the chief fine officer at Zurich, and said those two things don't compute. So we reverse searched the image, and then we found it on Shutterstock. So you can do a bit of digging around if there's something really that just something doesn't smell quite right about it. But is it safe to accept random invites from random people? Yes, it is. Go into it eyes open, and if something doesn't look right, have a look into it.
Okay, I'm gonna combine the next two questions, Keith. David has asked, do you think it's useful to have content scheduled to post each day? Which links into Joe's around posting across multiple platforms, and is there any benefit in using automated apps? So a link there, or do the bots ignore these?
All the evidence says that if you use a third-party tool to post, on the whole, it doesn't impact your reach. There is always miss. Like if you use a tool, I use Buffer is one. Hootsuite, people might be familiar with. There are a number of different platforms that you can put stuff into, and it'll just churn it where it needs to go. All the empirical evidence that they've looked at when they've looked at it shows that using a third-party tool doesn't impact your reach. So yes, you can. Posting every day on LinkedIn is in super user territory. Posting something out natively from your profile. I think 2 to 3 times a week on LinkedIn is probably good, but on Twitter, if you're tweeting and using Twitter as your channel, then you kind of need to be posting perhaps 3, 4, 5 times a day for stuff like that. You might want to go that much, but it's much faster platform. the stuff is gone. If I'm tweeting in the morning, people aren't going to see it by lunchtime. So you just need to think about how you do that. And again, using third-party tools to schedule stuff. Now, I'm not a big fan of scheduling for a number of different reasons. Well, it's helpful from a time perspective, and it's a once and done approach. The danger with this, and I've talked about this internally, is that at some point the world around you will happen and it will become instantly inappropriate for the posts that you've lined up that were perfectly fine when you set it up to not be, it just won't be appropriate at that particular point in time, whether there's a terrorist incident, whether there is I hate saying this in public, but the death of a senior royal is going to happen given how old our senior royals are. And at that very point, when Buckingham Palace announces those things, there will be happy, brilliant tweets that have been scheduled at that time. So as a tip for you, anyone who is scheduling content, never do it between 8 and 9 a.m. because that's when those announcements are going to be made, particularly around 8 o'clock. 8 o'clock is the trigger point for Operation Fourth Bridge or whatever it is. That's when it will be announced. So never schedule anything around 8 o'clock in the morning. So just free tip, because you just don't know. So if you're going to schedule, you have to be uber alert to what's going on in the world around you to make sure that what you've got lined up isn't going to become instantly inappropriate. And you're not in control of all the things. So even from a Zurich perspective, I have to be really careful about when I'm posting and scheduling content that there isn't something going on in our world that's going to make that inappropriate for our employees. We can do a big push here, but if I've got a change program being announced this afternoon in a particular part of the business, we've got I'm saying stuff on Twitter that says come and work for Zurich. It's a great place to work, and Instagram and Facebook, because I'm got it scheduled on those things. And then we're just putting 200 people at risk. You just got to be aware of what's going on internally and externally. So yes, you can. Yes, I'd encourage you to think about it, but you've got to be really alert to news and the world around you as you go to do it. Did I answer the questions?
I certainly think so, Keith. It looks like we've got very few questions now coming through. So I'll just give it a couple of seconds whilst I formulate a thank you in my head for you, because I have found this really interesting. We now have the feedback form online as well. For me, this is part of what we as a group should be doing, which is helping people be better in their roles. So from a group perspective, we're always happy to take suggestions for content people will find beneficial. You now know how to find people on LinkedIn. So I'm on there. Hugh Jones is a common name, or shall I say a popular name. But there is a photograph of me on there, which very clearly shows it's me. I'm more than happy that people reach out, connect, and ask for support and content going forward. But for me, Keith, a massive, massive thank you. I actually know you don't sit there twiddling your thumbs, and that you are relatively busy. So I know it's been a time out of your diary, which is appreciated. I'd also like to thank everybody who's joined us because it's only successful if we do get participants. So thank you very much indeed. And I shall give you 5 minutes of your day back, which will probably give most people enough time to get a brew before their next call starts. So thank you very much indeed.
Thanks, you. Thanks, everybody.